2014, and we reached out to those producers from March 24th through April 6th. And then in addition to the survey work, of course, there is the administrative data that we use. Specifically, we typically call it the utilization data. As you can see, particularly in Florida, from the Florida Citrus Administrative Committee, it really represents the quantity of fruit that's packed or processed and obviously was produced. That becomes a pretty valuable tool for us, particularly this late in the season. So without further ado, if we can make the slide move. There we go. Let me go ahead and share the new forecast for you for citrus this month. I would also point out before I talk about the new numbers, April's also the month when we have an opportunity to revise the previous season as well. And so there are some revisions to the previous year that are factored in here as well when you look at the percent change from the previous year. But with that said, let's look at the new forecast for this season. We'll start with oranges. We're now forecasting all orange production, 3.79 million tons. You can see that's up just 0.3% from last month. It is still down 13.7% from last year's now revised total. So the change from last month, only 0.3%, but a lot of movement happening there among the states. So in Florida, actually down 3 million boxes from last month's forecast. That's all in the Valencia portion of the crop. Same story we've been talking about all year. Small size, large drop. It's just even smaller size, even larger drop than what we had previously seen. So as a result, 3 million box reduction there. But then in California, actually up 3.7 million boxes from what we had previously forecast there. And so overall, that mostly washes out, and you see a fairly small change nationally from last month. Looking specifically at the non-Valencia versus the Valencia, you can see again the non-Valencia is 2.55 million tons. That's up 6.6% from the previous forecast, still down 6.1% year over year. The Valencia is down 10.6% from the previous month, so now we're down 26% year over year on that portion of the orange crop. Looking at the grapefruit, 397,000 tons now forecast. That's up 7.3% from last month's forecast. It is still down 9.4% from what was produced last season. Looking state by state from the previous forecast, Florida down 300,000 boxes, California up 600,000 boxes, and a slight increase in Texas as well. And that's what's leading to the overall change to that crop. Lemons, you can see we're now forecasting 980,000 tons. That's up just 0.4% from what we were previously forecasting, actually up 17.5% from last season. That's the only citrus crop you see on here that is actually larger this year compared to last. And then last but not least, the tangerines, 878,000 tons, no change from the previous forecast, but down sharply from what was produced last season. And with that said, we'll move on to some of the upcoming reports. Next week, you can see the crop production historical track records. It's kind of an underrated report, I think, because it's not new information, but pretty valuable information that shows how the numbers have tracked throughout the seasons over time. Cattle on feed on the 22nd, local foods. That'll be a big day as well. Long-awaited report there on April 28th. Ag prices at the end of the month, of course, on May 2nd, as usual, our monthly care reports. May 4th will be our annual non-citrus, and then, of course, May 12th, the next crop production report, as well as our final cotton numbers. And, of course, that will also feature the first yield and production forecast of the season for our winter wheat crop. Just a few reminders for folks as we wrap up on the math side of things here. At 1 o'clock, as Joe alluded to in the intro, I'll be out on Twitter hosting our regular Stat Chat series, taking any questions that folks might have about today's report. And in just a couple of short weeks, we'll be back in Chicago. That's right, back in Chicago for the data users meeting. There will still be a virtual option as well, and so folks aren't going to make the trip out there. They've still got an opportunity to sign up and follow along online with us. And then last but not least, for reminders, 2020 is a census year, and so we're gearing up to get all of those forms out into the mail by the end of the year. So still an opportunity for some folks to make sure you're on the list if you haven't already made sure that is happening. So that is the last slide that I have for you. I'll be happy to stick around after Mark's finished to take any questions you might have. So Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
Let me just make sure this thing is working, and it is. Good afternoon, Seth. And I won't be quite as quick as Lance was, but as you know, April tends not to be a super busy month for us in terms of new information. Focus is still on the old crop year. In May, so next month we'll roll out new year outlook. So that'll be a big one for us. But we do have, of course, a lot of new information to report, to incorporate anyway into this April version, including the grain stocks reports that came out in rice stocks and quarterly hogs and pigs. So we're focused on that. And then, of course, foreign production as well. Right now, we got to have a big focus on Brazil, second crop corn. We're kind of in the middle of the growing season there. April weather is critical. And we increased area this month. Yield is unchanged, but looking very good, and production will be up sharply from last year. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get to that part. Starting out with wheat, global production, small increase in production this month, mainly based on truing up some data. Increased Argentina, as you can see there, by 500,000 tons. That's really based largely on the fact their export pace has been so strong. It just suggested their crop must have been larger than we had been assuming. And then also EU truing up data there based on several countries. Just as those new estimates come out. So some offsetting changes there between Argentina and the EU. Global balance sheet tightening up a little bit this month, as you can see. Starting out with beginning stocks, actually we raised a bit this month based on some changes in Pakistan, Brazil, Argentina, and Saudi Arabia. And that also reflects that larger crop that we're forecasting back for Argentina. Other important items to note: trade. Wheat trade cut this month by 3 million tons. Several countries playing into that. Of course, kind of at the top of the attention here is Ukraine, which we cut by 1 million tons. Also cut U.S. exports, EU exports. That 1 million tons in Ukraine, that it largely goes into stocks and FSI, holding Ukraine now at about 19 million tons of exports, with the majority of that already shipped. Offsetting, so cuts in, as I mentioned, Ukraine, US, EU, offsetting increases in Russia, Brazil, and Argentina. Ending stocks tightening up there. That'll be a 5-year low. Also, just worth noting, those tighter stocks increased our FSI estimate for India based on some food distribution programs there, which are drawing down their stocks to some degree. U.S. wheat balance sheet, some changes here. Again, incorporating the March 1 stocks estimates that were reported on March 31st, suggesting a little tightening up there in our feed and residual use forecast. Also reduced our export forecast for wheat. Again, our prices are very high, not competitive. So we've just seen that slow down in pace. That 15 million bushel reduction is split between 10 million bushel reduction for HRW, 5 million for soft red winter. Exports there that we currently have, you can see the big reduction year over year, and those would be the lowest exports since 2015-16, and indeed the lowest export, U.S. export volume, second lowest export volume in 50 years. Raised our market price there, as you can see, by 10 cents a bushel. At this point, that crop is mostly marketed, but we did see some we've seen a lot of price strength recently, and including February NAS prices that came in at a pretty strong $9.16 a bushel. Moving into rice, small changes here on the production side. Brazil production forecast again this month. That just reflects, as we've been talking many months in a row now, about the drought, especially in southern Brazil, where most of the rice there is produced. Indonesia cut by 1 million tons as well. That's an area change, and what we've been seeing is some shifting of area into corn and out of rice. So corn area up, rice area down, reflected in that reduced production forecast. And then the global balance sheet, production down, we talked about that. That's led, of course, by Indonesia. Ending stocks now, again, forecast a record high, held about 66% of those ending stocks held by China, 22% by India. Trade up this month as well. It would also be record rice trade. Higher exports out of India, Pakistan, Thailand, and Burma. And also just worth noting here that we raised our China imports of rice by 600,000 tons to 5.2 million. And we've been seeing a lot more imports by China of broken rice from India, likely for feed use. So that is behind that strong demand and the adjustment this month. U.S. balance sheet, not much going on here. It would appear at first glance, nothing, none of the major categories changed, but there are some kind of offsetting changes behind the scenes here. Domestic use unchanged, but some offsetting changes between long grain use, which is up 2 million hundredweight, and medium short grain down 2 million hundredweight. And that just reflects the information we got from the rice stocks report last week. Average market price, we reduced 20 cents per hundredweight, just really based on the recent NAS data, NAS price data from February. And, again, forecasting, recognizing that we have 5 months left in that marketing year to achieve that season average price. Moving into corn, corn production area, corn production up a bit this month, focusing here on Brazil, up 2 million tons this month. That is entirely based on area. Again, we held yield unchanged. Yields are expected to be good. I'll give you a few slides to make that case here in just a minute. European Union increased as well, just basically truing up some data there. That mainly reflects increased crops out of Germany and Romania. But back to Brazil real quick. So, this time of year, we're really focused on that second crop, safrinha crop, the larger crop for Brazil. We're right in the middle of the growing season. April weather is critical. This is about equivalent to July in the United States. So we're watching it closely. And in terms of the center west, Mato Grosso area, we're past the peak of the normal peak of the rainfall. So on that downhill part of the curve, but worth noting that the corn, as you know, went in early this year. Very good conditions, plenty of rain, plenty of moisture. Rainfall trace here. This is part of that title got cut out. That's Mato Grosso. Rainfall trace. Abundant rains, well above average throughout the year. And then this one, looks like the title also got cut off, but that's Paraná. Again, the thing to point out here is that you'll recall Paraná had been dry, especially that impacted the soybean crop, but they really had a pretty strong recovery in rainfall here. Just in the past few weeks and months, really brought them back up toward average. So the corn went in, the rain started, so the conditions are looking quite good for the second crop corn in Paraná. As of right now, of course, still early, and April is critical. Okay, so corn balance sheet. Beginning stocks up a bit this month, just based on some back year adjustments to the EU and several other small producers. What else should I focus on here? Trade. Foreign exports down 2.9 million tons this month. So behind that number is a 4.5 million ton cut in Ukraine's exports, which is just like we did last month, split between feed use or FSI, feed and residual, and ending stocks. Also a 1 million ton cut in Serbia's exports. Interesting one there. That's just based on their export restrictions. So that's policy-driven reduction in Serbia's exports. Offset, these are offset to some degree by higher exports from Brazil, Canada, and India. Also, we lowered China's corn imports by 3 million tons, and that offsets much of that feed use increase that I talked about related to Ukraine, which is why we see here feed use down this month by 800,000 tons. And so let's talk about the U.S. balance sheet real quick. Again, just like with the rest of the commodities, no new information on the production side. But feed and residual adjusted lower by 25 million bushels. That is, again, based on the March 1 grain stocks report. Ethanol, corn use for ethanol use up by 25 million bushels. So those perfectly offset. Lower feed and residual, higher ethanol. And that higher ethanol use is, again, based on EIA data, as well as we've seen some good exports. And none of this is too surprising given the strength we've been seeing in the energy prices, which is supporting demand for ethanol, supporting prices and supporting production. Raised our season average market price 15 cents per bushel. Yeah, it should be no surprise there. You've seen the price strength recently. Typically, we have about 2/3 of the crop market at this time of the year. Moving into soybeans, production side, again, focused on South America, and this is a continuation of the story that we've had several months in a row now, just regarding the drought in that southern part of Brazil, also into Paraguay, that entire region. So cut our Brazil soybean production estimate again this month by 2 million tons. Cut Paraguay as well, and just it's notable, pretty sharp year-over-year declines for both Brazil and Paraguay. Tightening up those supplies year-over-year. World balance sheet, beginning stocks just did some adjustments to Brazil's back year crop. So increased carry and supplies there a bit. The rest of this, largely a China story here. Crush down 2.3 million tons this month. That's mostly reduced crush in China. Note also we reduced China's imports by 3 million tons, just again reflecting that lower crush demand. Trade down 3.3 million tons, and that is largely reduced exports out of Brazil and Paraguay. And ending stocks, global ending stocks tightening up just a bit, as you can see. U.S. balance sheet. Exports up. Again, this might not be too surprising. You've seen the sales coming through, recent strength in exports. Very good outstanding sales, picking up a lot of business from Brazil in their relatively tight crop there. So raised our forecast, still down year-over-year, but it's certainly been strengthening lately. Average market price didn't change it this month. Typically, we have about 3/4 of the crop market at this time of year, and we need prices to stay at about $15, $16 farm level for the balance of the year to achieve that $13.25. Moving into cotton, very small changes in cotton this month. Slight increase in production globally, led by Pakistan, and that's just based on information we got from Post. And also, not listed here on the slide, but the other country that we increased with was Greece, also based on information from Post. Cotton supply and demand, mostly a China story here. 500,000 bale cut in consumption. That reflects a cut in China's consumption. For some time now, China has, there's been kind of building macroeconomic concerns in China, raising some questions about their continued strength and demand. Those have only been exacerbated by the recent lockdowns due to coronavirus and et cetera. So cut their consumption, and that is also reflected in the reduction in trade and the increase in China's ending stocks. So mostly a China story in terms of the global cotton balance sheet this month. U.S. cotton balance sheet, not much to say in terms of the supply and use components, but we did increase season average price again, 91 cents per pound. Last time we increased it to 90 cents, it was in October. But those prices have been strong, especially in the last 2 months. So this, of course, would be a record farm price, season average farm price based on the data that we have. And recent price strength has certainly supported it. Moving into sugar, kind of a lot going on here in the sugar balance sheet this month. Starting with production, we cut production, as you can see, for both beet and cane. The sugar beet production decrease is based on processor data. A lot of that is due to a reduction in Michigan, where they are experiencing pretty low sucrose recovery and really kind of starting to realize the impacts of what was a very bad wet harvest. So that crop went in and it's just, it was harvested, but under poor conditions, and now it just isn't yielding the kind of sugar recovery that they would hope. At the same time, also the Red River Valley, the processing is expected to extend into June. And so given that it's going to continue that late into the year, there's concerns about the beet pile and shrink just because weather's going to be warming up. So between those two, we cut the beet production by 51,000 tons, as you can see. And then cane, we also cut cane, and that primarily reflects kind of the realization of the damage in Florida from the freezes we saw in January. So we're just really now learning what the impact of those freezes were. So that's the production side. Imports, high tier imports, we raised again this month 15,000 short tons. That's based on raw sugar that entered into the country in January and February. So that directly drives that number. Domestic deliveries, we increased as well. That's based on the observed pace of deliveries from beet processors and also direct consumption imports. And then when you work all the way through the balance sheet, at both the supply and demand side, you see we're tightening up the ending stocks quite a bit and reducing that stocks use ratio to 12.5% this month. Mexico, increased production there. And that reflects strong yields and very good recovery data coming in from Mexico. So there is reduced area, but the strong yields and good recovery more than offset the reduced area to increase production, or to have us forecast an increase in production for this year. That increased production, of course, the way Mexico operates, that all goes into exports. Ending stocks are unchanged. All this is really saying, you can see the strong increase year over year production for Mexico as well. All this is, the key point to take home here is that Mexico will certainly have enough sugar on hand to fulfill their export commitments. Let's move into livestock. Kind of a lot going on here as well. Beef production up 140 million pounds this month, and so this is a little bit of a complicated story. What we're really seeing here is, given the drought conditions in the plains, that's pulling cattle into feedlots, and also cow slaughter is high. So we're seeing near-term increases in production, but that's going to come back later as much tighter supplies into next year. But as of right now, that's reflected in higher production and reflected in that increased production forecast for this month. Pork, on the other hand, reduced that by 250 million pounds, reflecting both the slaughter pace that we've been observing and also the hogs and pigs report, which, as you know, last month showed pretty slow growth in pigs per litter and tightening up supplies generally. Broiler production also down based on slaughter pace, and turkey production down there at, as you can see, and that mainly reflects bird culls due to HPAI. So starting to see some impact from that. Prices, steer prices, small change this month, up a bit, and kind of some offsetting impacts there. Lower prices in the first quarter, but strengthening toward the end of the year, higher in the fourth quarter. Hog prices adjusted upward again this month, as really just based on tighter supplies and observed price strength. Price strength across the poultry complex as well. Broilers up, strong demand, relatively slow production growth that we're observing there. So the higher prices, not too surprising, and also increased our turkey price forecast based as well on tighter supplies. And just to point out, and again, I apologize, this slide, the heading got cut off, but what this slide is showing you is U.S. cow slaughter, excluding dairy. So this is cattle, cow slaughter of other cattle. Just to point out the high level of cow slaughter that we've been observing this year relative to past years, way above where we've been the past couple of years. So that's contributing to the near-term increase in beef supplies, but also raising concerns longer term for tightening up supplies further down the line. Meat trade, no change in beef and our beef export forecast this month. You can see, though, down year over year. Pork export forecast, we pulled back, mainly reflecting here just the fact that our prices are strong. We're starting to lose some competitiveness. So higher U.S. prices, while we got increased competition, lower demand by China. So just tougher competition for all those remaining markets. And with our prices, we're seeing some slippage in our own export prospects. Broilers, on the other hand, raised our export forecast. Strong demand, especially in the first quarter. Might be weakening in the second half, but for now, that demand remains strong despite the high prices, and we're just seeing that in very strong export pace. Turkey exports, on the other hand, reduced this month, as you can see, 85 million pounds, and that primarily reflects both lower production and HPAI discoveries that have restricted exports from several important turkey-producing states, including Indiana. Beef imports raised this month again, and just seeing a lot of strength, high U.S. beef prices, strength in processing grade beef demand. Okay, moving into dairy. Raised our dairy production forecast this month. That reflects higher cow numbers. So the data is actually showing, higher cow numbers than we had been expecting, which maybe is not too surprising. The strong prices are slowing that liquidation of the herds that we had been seeing and had been expecting. So Higher cow numbers, still lower year over year, but that liquidation is now happening at a slower pace. So imports and exports, fat basis, so reduced our import forecast. That mainly reflects lower imports of butter and cheese, while higher exports of butterfat products and cheese. So small change to our skim solid basis exports. That's all reflecting, or primarily reflecting, increased exports of whey and skim milk powder. Dairy product prices, to kind of wrap things up here. As you can see, we raised prices for most of the products again this month. Strong demand, tighter supplies, tighter stocks. Dry whey being the only product on this chart that we reduced this month, and really what that's doing is just making us a little bit more competitive in the export market, and that's consistent with the increased export forecast that you saw on the previous slides. Dairy prices by class, so up across the board. Class 3 price, we have strong cheese prices offsetting this slight reduction in dry whey. Class 4 price up, and all milk price up again this month to another new record, $25.80 per hundredweight. And that is all I have in terms of the data for this month's WASDE. A couple other things that are just worth noting. Again, May 12th will be the first assessment of the new crop year. So I hope everyone tunes in again. That's a big month for us. That first lookout, that's when we'll be incorporating the prospective plantings data that we got last week. And with that, I also just want to point out that we have David Bucios in the back of the room. Today is David Bucios' last day with us at the World Board. He's been a key member of our team, been helping out for several years now with this presentation, among many of the other things that he's helped out with the World Board behind the scenes. So we wish him the best, and he leaves us with some big shoes to fill. And with that, I'd just like to thank everyone for tuning in this month. Thank you for watching. Hope I provided you with some insight, and look forward to seeing you next month. And with that, I'll turn it over to Seth if he has any questions.